All right, everybody. Cheers and salutations. My name is Kit. This is Americans Learn, and today we're watching a video from Kraut, how vodka ruined Russia. Now, listen, I actually have a proud announcement to say. These past 2 months, I have removed beer and wine from my overall habit. Now, I don't have a drinking problem, but it's just I've noticed a more healthier position of myself, and listen, if you know anyone that does have addiction problems, be sure to be at their side, be it gambling or substance or alcohol or anything of that nature. People need help. And unfortunately, I guess this is a story because ever since I clicked on this video, the following videos are how vodka changed Russia forever. So okay, be sure to support the original content creator, Kraut. I haven't checked out his stuff in quite some time, but I don't know how I missed this video, but hey, sometimes I miss things out, so let's go ahead and check this video out. Like, comment, share, and subscribe as always. Hit that ring bell notification. Check out our other channels, Chicago Reacts, as well as Chicanime, our anime reaction channel, and join our Discord and maybe consider being a patron support as well, all you crazy party animals. But until then, let's enjoy this video in a 3, 2, and an uno, and out. Let's do it. Let's go, Ghostbusters. I like the subtlety here. Okay. Booze. The cause and solution to alcohol. The cause and solution to all of life's problems.
When you search through history books, you will find many anecdotes on the role that alcohol and other addictive substances played in shaping societies throughout human history. The pharaohs of ancient Egypt paid their farm laborers in bread and beer. Greek wine was one of the most prized commodities of the ancient
Rome. There you go.
World. So when the Carthaginians sold their low-quality wine abroad, they falsely labeled the amphoras as Greek wine. The British notoriously forced access and control over the 19th century Chinese economy by illegally selling opium to its people. But no historic relationship between a society and an addictive substance is as fascinating, sinister, and barely talked about
Tacos.
as the relationship between Russia and vodka.
I'm now automatically reminded of the series Delocated. Oh, it's a classic gem from Adult Swim. One of its first live action series, I think. Or maybe in the early stages. And one of the characters was an assassin trying to kill John, who we never saw his real face. I mean, we never did see his real face. But he also, the assassin who was with the Russian mob, was also trying to be a comedian, and he'd always add in vodka for his jokes. Vodka.
There is nothing special about vodka. It has no taste, no flavor, no smell. It's just ethyl alcohol, simply produced from wheat or rye. And these simple, not too special facts of
potatoes.
Vodka is exactly what made it so special. Its simplicity allowed it to be produced and consumed en masse by simple peasants throughout Eastern Europe beginning in the 8th century. Any peasant could make it and any peasant could sell it, until the 1480s. Until then, the lands we know as Russia were a set of small independent principalities and
until those Mongols came over and started their shite.
Kingdoms. Until Ivan III became the ruler of the Duchy of Moscow and by conquest united the principalities under one Russian kingdom, of which he became the Tsar. Ivan established a centralized government with a centralized autocratic rule controlled by the king. And as he built his state, he noticed the popularity of that cheap, intoxicating
It's like, are all you people just, all what you do is you drink? Is that it? Stop drinking.
Spirit amongst his peasants and had an idea. He banned the production and sale of alcohol by peasants and declared the production and sale of alcohol a royal privilege. All alcohol was now the property of the Russian crown and could
Boo, lame.
only be produced by and bought from the Russian crown. This was a guaranteed source of revenue for the Russian royal family, a monopoly on a cheap product that everyone wanted and which could be very cheaply produced en masse. Throughout the centuries, the Tsars opened vodka plant after vodka plant, pumping out cheap alcohol while filling their own pockets. A system that was so profitable that when Catherine the Great rewarded lesser nobles for their service, she didn't give them land, but vodka production and selling ground.
Jeez, Catherine. Where'd you get that idea? Under a horse?
To cash in on this lucrative monopoly, a system that lasted for almost 428 years. And as much as this may sound like just a mere little interesting historic anecdote on a long-gone mercantile economic system, there is far more to it than that. Something sinister, the reverberations of which still echo throughout Russian society to this day. Alcohol is a poison, harmful to the soul and body. Therefore, it is a great sin to drink alcohol and to offer it to others. And it is even a greater sin to produce and sell this poison. This phrase is from Tolstoy. When Tsar Nicholas II had to rescind powers to an elected body in 1905, one of the first things the Russian liberals and social democrats who were newly elected into a position of power wished to do was to combat the massive alcoholism problems of Russia.
Yeah, I can see how that's a problem. 400 years of that. Hey, listen, guys. I think we got a drinking problem. Can you imagine that? It's like, hey, I think we got a drinking problem. Yeah, buddy. Yeah, I think you're right, too. One more glass of vodka.
The first step was to ask the famous and revered novelist to write a warning label to be printed on every single bottle of vodka. The Tsar, who owned the entire alcohol industry, refused. Because the system the Tsars established over the course of 400 years was not only a source of revenue. By controlling the entire market, they also determined the price and consequently kept the population drunk on a constant mass supply of cheap and widely available vodka.
And as long as you have the populace drunk, they're not going to ask questions like, man, life really sucks. Why am I always drinking some? That's right, because those freaking czars have all the money.
A peasant who wastes his money on vodka is too drunk to think of his situation and how he got into it, too drunk to organize any protest against his circumstances, so drunk he beats his kids into being drunks like him, and so drunk he beats his wife into submission. In the end, that peasant is a peasant in service of ensuring the security of the regime that keeps him drunk. The Tsars of Russia established a profitable system of state-subsidized alcoholism, which not only ensured them personal wealth, but the security of their regime. They were in essence drug dealers, or at least relied on the same addiction-fed market that a drug dealer would rely on.
Tacos. We're talking about tacos.
Alcohol addiction is a horrible disease. It increases blood pressure, inflamed and swollen blood vessels, kidney, pancreas and liver failure that leads to an excess of fat cells creating deformed abdomens. But far from just the individual.
And you know something? I'm glad I've stopped touching booze. I'm glad it's out, you know? I've never felt better.
Effects, alcohol is also part of a vicious social circle of misery. Nobody wakes up one day and decides to become an addict. Addiction is preconditioned on misery and despair. It appears where there is despair and hopelessness, and perversely increases that hopelessness. The alcoholic not only becomes more hopeless and miserable themselves, but will contribute to the misery and hopelessness of those around him. Perplexingly, addiction on a massive social scale creates social strife and misery, while simultaneously robbing those affected by it of the means to do something about it. This is why the drug trade comes with violence, social decline and disaffection of communities, because it uses misery as an economic commodity. It is because of this, and largely forgotten today, that the Russian Communist Party was a prohibitionist party that advocated for the banning of...
Oh, I never knew that. Well, you know what? But it would make sense. It would make sense.
Liquor. In early Soviet propaganda, you will find this reflected, as well as in old Soviet movies, in which the revolutionaries smash liquor bottles as if they were chains that had constrained them. Leninism was strictly prohibitionist and declared alcohol to be a vice by which the bourgeoisie subjugated and controlled the proletariat. Consequently, after the Bolshevik takeover,
so in other words, yeah, you don't have the freedom to drink anymore, comrade.
the Tsar's vodka plants were all shut down and closed. For a while, when Stalin seized power, he reopened the vodka plants.
Because our boy liked to drink.
Started filling bottles again and distributed them cheaply amongst the public. Stalin pretty much rebuilt the old Tsarist system of subsidized alcoholism that the revolutionaries had tried to dismantle. He just renamed it to the People's Vodka. In a very cynical move, the Russian people already had a people's vodka for 400 years. This series of events is commented on by George Orwell in his famous book Animal Farm, an often overlooked scene where the animals in their revolution destroy all the alcohol they found in the house of the farmer Jones, except for Napoleon, who steals himself away with some liquor. And the Tsarist system, which
Napoleon, how could you?
was re-established by Stalin, remained in place throughout the remaining 60 years of Soviet history. Its effects were most strongly felt starting in the 1970s and throughout the 1980s during the Soviet Union's increasing economic decline. In those days there was not much to work for, there was not much to celebrate, there was a lost war still being fought in Afghanistan, and there was not much for the state to sell. But there was always money to be made when socialism fails by selling bottles of cheap vodka to a miserable public. The recent HBO series Chernobyl did an excellent job at hinting to its audience how by the late 1980s Russian society had a deep-seated and systematic alcoholism problem. The
Why does everyone gotta drink? That was a great series, though, Chernobyl.
Stolchinaya vodka bottles you see in the series are also somewhat famous, because you couldn't close them anymore once you took the cap off. They were made that way because in production the assumption was that the average Russian, once opening a vodka bottle, would finish it in one sitting, therefore closing the bottle wasn't necessary. By the late 1980s, the
Oh, that is evil. That is depressing.
alcoholism problem reached such an extent that Gorbachev, in desperation, enacted a prohibition of liquor. This resulted in the mass appearance of illegal vodka plants throughout the country and was therefore abandoned. Today, almost 30 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the problems remain. The system of state-subsidized alcoholism no longer exists.
Ugh, don't tell this to Putin. Gotta be careful. You never know when Putin might get you.
The vodka plants, though, were privatized and are owned by oligarchs who still sell the vodka at cheap prices. No measures were taken by the Russian government to stem the benign systematic alcoholism and excessive alcohol consumption of the Russian public. The ramifications of such are of course felt in crime rates, productivity, and social decline and misery. Russia will eventually not get around having to confront a legacy of 400 years of alcoholism. And this is more than just a history lesson, let alone restricted to Russia. Think of the current opiate crisis in the United States. How the current response to social misery is to dish out pills to help people stomach through their days and lives. How a fully legal dependency on addictive substances was created in the United States at a profit that uses social and individual misery as a market commodity. And more to the point, how it is largely ignored and not a topic of contention. Drug-riddled and miserable communities often find themselves within such a state because it is the misery and hopelessness that creates the perfect market conditions for addictive substances, which consequently increase the misery and violence while robbing communities of the ability to rid themselves thereof. The entirety of our understanding of addiction and how it plays into society through the ills it creates is largely flawed and dominated far too much by a judgmental standard that reduces the problem to individuals to be punished.
I've seen communities like this in Chicago and in Indiana too, and in other parts of the country. This is rough to look at.
Rather than social ills in need of solutions. If you're interested in this topic and want to know more, I recommend to you to read Drink, A Cultural History of Alcohol by Ian Gately.
All right. All right. I'm gonna take these headphones off. I'm gonna get serious here. I know a couple of people who have battled with addiction, and I myself have been, dealing with a lot of stress and emotional trauma too. And I don't use any vices to get me through, anything like that. But I know people who have suffered from it, and you know, if you have an addiction, the one way you can overcome it is by asking for help. And the thing is, when someone destroys their life, that pain is transferred to the people that they love. I am I think we are all well aware of the dangerous vices in our lives. I mean, in America, yes, there is an opioid crisis, and it has to deal with the loss of business and work. the stress, the economic collapse in 2008, and so much more. And it's a problem because you have big pharma and its influence, and how it just feels like one pill a day makes the pain go away. That's not how it works. And obviously, I wasn't aware of how the Russian oligarchs are starting from the Russian czars, then to the Soviet administration, as well as then to the oligarchs, were continuing on with the process of vodka. But it's clear that addiction is something that humanity has been struggling against since the early foundations of civilization. And it's just important for us to be there for each other and to support one another and help each other out. Shout out again to Kraut for this video. If you're in pain, sometimes the best thing you do is to talk about it and speak to people that will listen. There are organizations and groups that will help. And if you are suffering from addiction, the bravest thing you can do is step forward and confront that demon. There's a lot of people I know who got consumed by a gambling addiction. That one's very ugly. A drug addiction. Oh, that one too, very ugly. And yes, alcoholism too. This video really hit home. Normally I say something funny, and I try to be humorous here on this channel. I do. I try to be. But I'm gonna be thinking about this video for a while. But if there's one, you know what? I got a positive note. 2 months free, not touching booze. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't have that any kind of problem with booze or anything. It's just, you know, I have been, dealing with my own trauma, and I have to say, not touching any booze has improved my physical self and my mental self. And I like to have a drink here and there with a meal, but this is the longest I've gone without it, and I never felt better. It's been a while, and it feels good. Sometimes a strong, healthy mind and strong, healthy body is what gets you through the day. So take good care of yourselves, folks. Love one another. Be there for each other, and let's just all go forward, shall we? Take good care, and shout out again to Kraut.